Hello, we're back again to discuss a contemporary issue in theology. We're under the banner of evangelical shallowness. And what we want to talk about today is the word faith movement. The word faith movement is a fairly new movement that has caught hold in Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity for the most part. Began about 50 years ago in earnest, maybe 60, under the auspices of the teachings of Kenneth Hagin. Kenneth Hagin founded the Rhema Bible Training Institute in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He also trained a number of people who believe and teach what he does, including people like Kenneth Copeland, Jerry Savelle, Fred Price, some other people on the fringes of his movements in the early days were people like Norval Hayes, John Osteen, and others. Today, people like Creflo Dollar, Joyce Meyer, Eddie Long to some extent, and several others are part of the Word Faith movement. Word Faith, which we will define here in just a moment, is a group within mainly Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity that believe that you have power in your tongue to create or destroy what makes your life good or bad. In other words, you can say it and it shall be so. It's also called by folks within the group the positive confession movement, and it's been derisively called the name it and claim it, blab it and grab it, confess it and possess it movement. Its Christian roots go back to Kenneth Hagin, but its theological roots go back deeper, back into the 19th century and the onset of what is called New Thought metaphysics. New Thought metaphysics was one of the occult movements that grew up in the end of the Enlightenment, beginning of the Industrial Age in America. It paralleled the rise of things like Mormonism and Adventism, and its founder was a man by the name of Phineas Parker Quimby. Quimby's most famous disciple was a woman named Mary Baker Eddy, who wrote a book called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, which became the sacred text of the Christian Science movement, which is neither Christian nor science. But it is an offshoot of the New Thought metaphysics, the idea of positively confessing your life, that the tongue holds the power of creating your utopia. Now, there's a side to this that I find interesting. A friend of mine was quoting someone else when he said that cults are the unpaid bills of the church. And as we entered into the modern Enlightenment age, we entered into a time period where spiritual reality and faith reality was so divorced from every other kind of reality that for many parts of the Christian church, faith and spiritual matters disappeared. Remember that we talked about the liberal Protestant movement, where it was a maximal accommodation to modern thinking, and anything that was miraculous, anything that was spiritual, was automatically questioned. Well, that's an unpaid bill. The historic Christianity has always been miraculous, and you cannot remove the miraculous from Christianity and still have anything that looks like Christianity. So, as the 20th century dawned, much of evangelical, or what would become evangelical Protestantism, was without a spiritual and serious faith component. It was a maximal accommodation to culture. Miracles were doubted as we progressed into the modern age. Remember, progress was the king. But things like World War I and World War II that sandwiched a Great Depression kind of kicked the whole idea of progress out the window. We realized we weren't progressing as much as we thought. But we had a religious Christian institution that was unable to minister to people's needs because it had been generations since Christianity had really operated on a supernatural basis, or at least had some sort of roots in anything that was supernatural or faith-based. So the soil was very fertile for cults of such natures to come in and capitalize on that spiritual vacuum that was in the hearts of Christian men and women. And, a cult doesn't necessarily have to be something that carries you out of the faith. It can be something that is, or rather, the cult is something that does carry you out of the faith. But false teaching can creep in and kind of mix with good teaching and produce a hybrid, which is what I think the Word of Faith movement is. It's they still believe in Jesus. They still believe in God the Father. They're doctrinally sound, at least in doctrinal statements. They are... Any doctrinal statement they might write would sound very much like a classical Pentecostal in most cases. But it's the way they view things and the way they change terminology and the way that they utilize Scripture in a way that is novel to history that is a real problem. Because Scripture does say that you speak with your mouth and you have life and death is in the power of the tongue and things like that. They are in the Bible. Now, they're not the dominant voice of the Bible, but they're there. And so the Word Faith movement capitalizes on these scriptures and makes them their mantra, more or less. And so in that way, they can biblically justify what they teach. Now, the difficulty comes in is when we have to be able to show that the origins of such teachings are not biblical in themselves, but rather come from someplace else. And that is where the work, I don't have a copy of the book beside me, but the work of D.R. McConnell, his book called A Different Gospel, which I realize I say is on reserve in the library, but not all of you can read it. So I'm going to try to use 2 or 3 videos and summarize really what he's talking about. And then you can do your assignments off of that. McConnell does the hard work and discovers that there is a direct link of teaching between the New Thought metaphysics world of the 19th century and a man by the name of E.W. Kenyon, who was a popular preacher in the early 20th century. Now, you've probably never heard of E.W. Kenyon. A lot of folks haven't. But E.W. Kenyon, and not Kenneth Hagin, is the real father of the Word Faith movement. Hagin, and McConnell lays this out so beautifully in his book, plagiarized page after page after page of Kenyon and published it under his own name. So in effect, Hagin stole, without reference, many of Kenyon's ideas and published them under his own name. By the time Hagin began writing, Kenyon had grown old and died and had been largely forgotten. But Hagin stumbled upon the writings of E.W. Kenyon and popularized them and began a movement, even though the ideas did not originate with Kenneth Hagin. They originated with E.W. Kenyon. Now, Kenyon's genius was the ability to blend Christian doctrine, standard Christian teaching, with cultic and occultic principles, like positive confession, like speaking into existence your own life situation. These are all the children of New Thought metaphysics. That's why a lot of folks say that Word Faith sounds a lot like Christian Science. Well, it should. They're cousins. Their Uncle Kenneth E.W. Kenyon and Aunt Mary Baker Eddy are brother and sister spiritually. And so the Word Faith movement is based upon the ability to speak into existence the ideal life situation that you would want. And again, the founder of this, the real founder, was a man named E.W. Kenyon. And then he passed it on to Kenneth Hagin, who then passed it on down the tree to Kenneth Copeland, Charles Capps, Fred Price, Jesse Duplantis, Jerry Savelle, on down to current day folks like Creflo Dollar, Joyce Meyer, and others. Now, in subsequent videos, I want to take a few moments and speak about what makes this movement unorthodox, if not heretical. Now, I think that there are some unorthodox moves in it, but I think that there's at least one that is absolutely heretical. And it's one that they've kind of tried to whitewash over the years. But all of the word faith teachers hold this in common. And that's the doctrine of identification. That Jesus was condemned to hell for the sins of mankind. And that's just utterly ridiculous. But we'll come back to that in a moment. What makes this so dangerous? What's wrong with the Word of Faith movement? What's wrong with people wanting a better life? Well, there's nothing wrong with wanting a better life, but there's a lot wrong with thinking that you can speak a better life into existence. It's one thing to pray and ask God to bless you, and it's another thing to pray and ask God to be healed, or to pray and ask God for anything. It's fine to pray and ask. I mean, the worst he can say is no, but it's fine to pray and ask. The problem with word faith is that you don't ask, you demand. You say, now I claim this. Now, God, you have to do it because I have claimed it. It's a classic spiritual case of putting the cart before the horse. And it takes in people who are gullible and people who are without historical sound teaching of the church over the years. And as I mentioned in the previous video, it's something that I grew up with. I grew up listening to these things. My parents, whom I love dearly, they swallowed this. They thought that this was the true gospel. Never worked for them. I don't understand why they thought it, because it did not work. But they held to it for the remainder of their lives. And it saddens me because I think that my mother, at least, would probably still be alive today if she had not been so adamant about claiming her healing and not going to the doctor. But, I can't change the past, and those things are kind of painful for me to talk about, and I'll just leave them be there. But I think that the word faith movement can be extremely dangerous when these positive confessions do not work. And there's no guarantee that they should work, because we can't demand of God. We're not in a position to tell him what he needs to do. He's the boss, not us. We can ask, and we can ask a lot. There's nothing wrong with asking. Again, that's the difference. We can ask. We cannot demand. And word faith teaches to demand. And the reason it teaches to demand is it locates, as McConnell has done, I want to make sure I give McConnell credit for this, but as McConnell has done, he's located 5 key doctrines of the word faith movement. And we'll be back in the next video and talk about those 5 key doctrines, or at least part of them, because they are very important. And we'll be back in just a moment. Have a good day. Thanks.